Good morning, folks. Let's get this clown show rolling here. Gonna make sure that this makes it to Facebook because this is a follow-up video to something that I kind of went off on Facebook, not YouTube. Yeah. So we all have seen it. Student loans, not paying. Student loan forgiveness is theft. Yada yada yada. Um, we've all seen it. We've all heard it. So let's get into it for a second here because I think some people have it a little backwards and I think others don't actually know how student loans work in the modern era but think that they do. So what we have on this stream today is our little guest, a image that I had to draw up because I wasn't about to bust out. I was going to bust out my student loan contract, and then I noticed all of the really personal information that I really didn't want, Facebook or YouTube or anyone else on the internet to see, stuff like social security numbers. Account numbers for things. So I definitely decided against doing that. But I did give it a good read through before I did this video. And so here's what I can tell you. You see that little arrow between your money and the IRS? Yeah, that's you paying your taxes, right? The minute you do that, it stops being your money. It stops being taxpayer dollars. That's where it becomes government money. Because from there, guess what? You have the Department of Treasury. Now, Congress would normally be between these two lines, right? If it was part of a bill or whatever. Let's say, I don't know, I'll pull a weird example, and the one that's kind of in my brain is the one that Rand Paul was kind of talking about. Funding for researching the effects of, what was it, cocaine on ducks or something like that, and how it can make them promiscuous or some weird study like that, right? That would need congressional approval. So, the student loan system that is run by the Fed. As part of our collegiate bills, and actually I should probably, and I think I will, we will pull up so you can see for yourself. I'll have a second guest on, a surprise guest. Let's see here. What law makes student loans happen? Yeah. I don't care about what our current Doddard fucking chief has to say about it. See, this is why I wish when you type something in they were more accurate. Like when I asked what I asked, I was asking about previous laws. I don't care about this is not about the debt collection part. This is about what laws enable student laws to happen. It is a law. It was passed by Congress and the Senate already. So this is this is like something that Congress more or less gets to be hands off on, just like your NFA tax stamp on anything that's in the NFA items list. There's a lot of automated, and I call these automated laws because it's what they are. They set it once and try to forget it, right? But that doesn't usually work very well, by the way, because you need to constantly adjust certain numbers for X number of reasons, and some things just aren't applicable anymore, right? So, I guess we won't be having that surprise guest because, search engines don't actually search for the stuff that... I hate using Wikipedia as a source, but... let's see here. All right, there's the number right there. The Higher Education Act of, what is that, 1965? No, 55. All right. Sorry, the screen's a little far away. It's playing hell on my eyes first thing in the morning. Okay. Student loans were first offered in 1958 as part of the National Defense Education Act, NDEA. They were available only to select categories of students, such as studying engineering, science, or education. Alright. So we scroll right on down here. Well, that's kind of backwards. It said 1955, but it's 1965 down here. I'd say that's a typo. It addressed the wider perception that the United States... Yeah, it had to do with Sputnik and Russian satellites, right? So you scroll down and you get into the 1960s, introducing the Higher Education Act of 1965 with the goal of encouraging greater social mobility and equal opportunity. Yeah, basically what it was them saying, hey, yeah, we have this loan program. We want more people going to get a higher education, because at that point in time, a higher education was actually education, not propaganda, right? And by the way, on the note of propaganda versus education, a lot of these programs also cover trade schools. So go out and get an automotive degree. We need more auto mechanics. Go out and get an HVAC degree. Everyone needs air conditioning worked on it, despite the fact that, you know, the climate change lobby is constantly railing against both of those industries. They're both things that we're going to use regardless, right? You know, and agriculture is another one. You know, just like go to a trade school, man. Skip the rest of it. So, anyway, 1967, the Bank of North Dakota, you know, made that was the recorded first federally insured student loan, right? So that federally insured part is actually the thing that hangs a lot of the left up on these student loans. Like, they think that the money's just going to come from nowhere. No, it actually comes from the IRS and the Treasury Department, which is your taxpayer dollars, right? And a lot of people on the right like to say, well, it's still taxpayer money. That is true, but is it really? And here's the problem with making that statement. And this is like the biggest part of the argument. And I'm going to get into some of the shadier stuff later. It stops being your money when you render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. And by that I mean when you pay your taxes. As soon as you pay the IRS, that little arrow on the chart right next to my head, according to OBS, right there, as soon as you do that action, it becomes the government's money once again. You are literally paying them basically their toll for living here and doing a job, right? And, well, in some cases, if we were not talking about college, if this part down at the bottom said not college, but like the loan handler and the college/trade part were replaced with like high school or whatever, this chart would still look about the same, except there would be some differences. See, most of this stuff actually has very little to do with the student themselves. When the student asks for the loan, what they're asking for is for student aid, and we're about to get into the difference there in a minute. But we're going to continue to read through, this stuff. So once you get before like 2010, right? Loans originated and were funded directly by the Department of Education. Government guaranteed loans originated and were funded by private investors. So if you didn't pay your loan, the Department of Education and a group of private investors did that. So, direct-to-consumer private loans were the fastest growing segment of educational finance. And back then, if you didn't pay your loans, it was absolutely theft. Like, you were stealing from a group of investors and directly from the Department of Education. Fast forward to 2010. you had stuff added to it like disability discharge, right? And then it became the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008. The regulation took effect on January 1st, 2010. So the amount of student loan debt held by Americans exceeded the amount of credit card debt held by Americans. Yes, that was a thing. At that time, student loan debt totaled at least 83 billion, which approximately 80% was federal and 20% was private. Yeah. So, yes, we still have the situation where it's quote-unquote private investors, except once you fast forward even more, the number of private investors disappears even further, right? By the quarter of 2015, the outstanding student loan debt and scrutinized had surpassed $1.3 trillion, right? Okay. So, guaranteed loans were eliminated in 2010 through the Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibilities Act and were replaced with direct loans. The Obama administration claimed that the guaranteed loans benefited private companies at taxpayer expense, but did not reduce student costs. Alright, so that's where you have effectively removed more or less your private part of the loan process, removing the theft from the shareholders of certain organizations. But they're still a part of it, and they still handle it courtesy of Fannie Mae. Also, Nelnet is a collection agency, which is also a federal-run, basically, collection agency. Borrowers determined to be disabled by the Social Security Administration. This is more about the disability stuff. Right? Basically, if you were on disability, you could have your student loans discharged because you couldn't work for one reason or another. Which, on the note of couldn't work, I'm not going to name his name. He's a good friend, or he was a good friend. I haven't talked to him in a long time. But when we were in automotive together, he got into a motorcycle accident, and like he was wheelchair ridden for months, and then crutches for years, and he still went out and found a job. So before we get too far into the weeds about the rest of the student loan stuff, I just want to say that the SSA thing is more of a for people who don't want to torture themselves and push themselves after, either being severely injured or maybe they already had the disability, by putting themselves through the torture of having to deal with day-to-day people at a workplace. Because let's face it, when you're in as much pain as that poor guy was, the fact that he did go out and get a job, I applaud him, because either one, he's a masochist, or two, he's got the friggin' grit of literal friggin' sand. Like, there are probably rocks that are softer than that man's mentality, I would say. And that is not an insult. That is a compliment. Alright, so moving on. As of January 1st, 2018, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 established that discharge due to death or disability of the borrower was no longer treated as taxable income. So basically, you can no longer it's not even related to the taxes anymore, right? It's set to sunset in December 31st of 2025. So literally, like, the end of the year, New Year's, a year from 2024, which is the date of this recording, basically. In an effort to improve the student loan market, Lenke, SoFi, and Common Bond began offering student loans and refinancing at lower rates than traditional lenders. Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, we all know about that stuff, right? The Federal Reserve Bank of New York, February 2017, Debit and Credit reported that 11% of aggregated student loans was 90 or more days delinquent. So that's just like 11% of what's not being paid back, which, I mean, yeah, it sucks, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Betsy DeVos. Oh, God, that woman. 2018. Yes, this was under Donald Trump. Just because she worked under Trump does not mean that I have to like her. Would be replaced with a... the borrower defense program would be replaced with a stricter repayment policy as of July 1st, 2019. When a school closes for fraud before conferring degrees, students would have to prove that they were financially harmed. So basically, if you went to an online school and they were found to be basically a fake school, and you could prove that you were financially damaged through the court system, you could enact a class action lawsuit and get reimbursed for the amount that, you know, they screwed you over for. In my case, it was like $30, by the way. That was the amount I got dispersed from the lawsuit because that was how much after... So lawsuits are a whole other racket. I'm not going to get into those here, but I can in a later video if someone wants to comment. In 2019, Donald Trump ordered loan forgiveness for permanently disabled veterans. Yeah, which on average were about $30,000 a piece. All right. March along, we get the whole COVID thing. Your student loans get put on basically temporary relief or whatever, right? I should also point out the thing that they left out of here too was that Obama actually forgave a bunch of student debt back during his presidency too. It wasn't just Trump doing it for veterans, which was applauded by a lot of people on the right and just kind of eye-rolled by people on the left, right? Because we all know how that paradigm works. Alright, so we get down here to COVID, the relief where you didn't actually have to pay your student loans because everyone was locked up in their homes under government order. I'm not going to go into how I feel or my fucking views on that are. Well, maybe just a little bit. When you have a pandemic, you quarantine the sick, you let the rest of society function. By the way, which oddly enough is more or less what we did here in Maine. If you were sick, you were told by your employer, stay home. Just 1.2% of borrowers were continuing to pay down on their loans during the over 2 years of optional deferment. So basically, you didn't necessarily have to pay from 2020 to 2023. Which was the June of last year. 2021, student loan servicers began dropping out of the student loan business loan, including Fed loan servicing on July 8th, Granite State Management and Resources on July 20th, Navient on 28th, according to Sallie Mae in 2021. 1 in 8 families lenders are using private student loans when federal financing. We got another one. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm actually getting dehydrated doing all this talking right now. 1 in 8 lenders are using private. Yeah, I already said that. So that's another funny thing about this whole student loan racket, and I'll get into it in a second. I'm going to finish reading all of this so everyone can do this. 2021, the Second Circuit of Appeals, right? The U.S. Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that private student loans are dischargeable in bankruptcy, which was related to 2 cases. In 2021, the Biden administration announced it would be using executive action to cancel $5.8 billion in student debt held by 323,000 people who are permanently disabled. Again, you have to be permanently disabled to qualify for that, right? In 2022, November, federal judge William Alsop ruled for immediate relief for about 200,000 school student debtors, and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to grant emergency relief to 3 for-profit colleges. In the 30 years, 1991 and 2001 to 2022, private college institutions doubled, which public school tuitions increased by 2.5%. This is going into how the increase in your taxpayer money that's already going into education, right? That's all that this is saying. Like, in these years, we've seen a massive increase in all this other stuff. This is the one that gets contentious right here. And it actually isn't contentious because the Supreme Court told him that he couldn't. Right? In February 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in Biden v. Nebraska concerning President Biden's order to cancel student loan debt for an estimated 40 million debtors. In 2023, June, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of Nebraska to block Biden's plan to forgive federal student loans. Okay, so I'm going to kind of throw this out there because people don't know it. Obama and Trump actually had previously forgiven student loan debt. In the case of Trump, it was for veterans. In the case of Obama, it was only like 50,000 random lucky people who got it. I was not, because I was actually in school at the time that it happened. So that's something that they left out of here. I don't know why they would. Everyone knows Wikipedia is like basically can be edited by anyone, but is more or less a leftist troll stomping ground. So it kind of confuses me as to why they leave that out, but they did. I probably have the number wrong too. It was probably like 500,000 people or some such nonsense, right? Okay, so here's the thing, right? When it comes to student loan forgiveness, we've got kind of a double standard. If you're out there trying to work and earn a living, which, believe it or not, I do work, just not the kind of work that you think I do. My $5,000-ish in student loan debt is literally a joke. I'm not even kidding. If I could live rent-free for half a year, I could go work at a gas station and pay it off in a half a year. So I'm not really talking about myself, and when I get irritated by this stuff, it's because morons plague my fucking Facebook feed with talking points from either side, and they have no idea what they're talking about. So this whole video is just to educate people on what is actually going on with your money when it comes to this stuff. Alright, so back in the 50s and 60s, we had the collegiate loan stuff happen, right? Like, you could get federal and private loans for college, which I think may have been great at the time, but now is the biggest pain in our ever in existence. Babe, could you not? That is clearly audible through... Babe.
Sorry.
Anyway, yeah, she's throwing the bone for the dog, and, like, it's very jarring because I'm in an almost empty living room, so there's an echo. Anyway, and you guys are probably hearing it. It's not anything falling apart. No one's getting the crap kicked out of them. It's just her playing with the dog, which there are softer things that could be tossed down that hallway that are not the bone.
You would bring them to me. He brings his bone.
Well, that's because he wants to eat his bone. Anyway, which would be a great segue to a sponsor if I had one. Alright, anyway. So here we go. You've got your money, you pay the IRS. At that point, you have lost control over what that money does, except by voting. Plain and simple, whether you like it or not. Effectively removing you from being connected but to that money. But it's still taxpayer money, right? But under basically the general rule of, possession being 9/10 of the law, you no longer possess that money, right? Which, by the way, it doesn't have to be forgiven using taxpayer money. They could just stack it into the deficit too, and then we just say, it's the Congress's problem, and they need to figure out how we're going to pay off that disgusting deficit. Which they'll never do, which means basically all our student loan debt would basically be stuck in limbo until the country basically collapses under the weight of its own freaking debt, which... I'm kind of to the point, on that point alone, where I'm like, big friggin' deal. Anyway. So the money goes from the IRS, the Department of Treasury, then it gets dispersed amongst all the other little departments, basically. Including the Department of Education. Alright, and it's usually... How it works is the Department of Education and the Department of the Treasury... have a nice little direct link, so they get to say, they get a nice little email that says you get X number of billions of dollars or trillions of taxpayer dollars to do whatever the hell you want with, right? And now, bear in mind, these departments are right under the presidency. Like, if the president tells them to jump, they say how high, okay? And the only way to get that to change is an act of Congress. Basically, what that means is the president can say jump, but if Congress doesn't like what they're jumping on, they get to step in and say, hang on a minute, let's get the board of nails out from in front of you and let's put a mattress so you actually have a soft landing. That's how that works. It's called, basically, a congressional oversight. Which is also being used for other things now as well. So anyway, you get down to the money getting to the Department of Education. So from here, you would assume that federal money goes right straight to the college or the student. Yes and no. This is where it gets into the stuff that people don't understand. Alright? When you get down here, you get down to your loan handler, right? That's your private organization. Okay? So, that's the stuff that gets lumped in from, like, a private company. Like, let's say out of my $5,000, 1,000 of it was from, like, I don't know, let's just pull a random financial institution. Actually, heck, let's make one up. Let's see. We'll call it Battleship Federal Credit Union just because, right? Let's say your loan handler is Battleship Federal Credit Union because for some reason, whatever reason, your student loan is being handled by a credit union. Which, bad example, I know, because they're also federal. Just trust me on this. It is a bad example, but humor me and let's say that it was a private organization that just had that name, okay? That 10% is the 10% that is going to get you screwed over. Now, you could sit here and say that the student loan forgiveness for, sorry about that, I got distracted. Facebook popped up a notification again. So anywho, let's say that you're a student, you're going to college, and you apply for that loan. Number one, there's no guarantee that you're going to get approved for it. That's the first problem of the student loan system that a lot of people don't actually grasp. So if you're that student and you go apply for that student loan, you're not guaranteed to get the loan. There's a really strong chance that you will because, the federal government wants everyone under financial subservience all the friggin' time anyway, which I am against, personally speaking, which is why I think the entirety of this student loan racket needs to be just deleted and forgotten about and buried, and have a freaking statue that says no more federal student loans, period. That's my opinion. I also think that a better way to handle this would be that colleges need to have direct funding from the federal government, just like we do public schools, and that's it. And there are people out there who are going to say, but that means that your institutions of college are going to be propagandized by the government. And I sit there and I say, at this point they already are, so what difference does it make? Yeah, take that as you will. Oh, but the previous generations never got free college. Well, it's going to be, at that point it'd be free, so what's stopping them from going right now? The fact that they don't want to. That's literally what would be stopping them. Yeah, I really do think that all of this can just be deleted. And then there's going to be the argument of those out there who are going to say, that's socialism. So's public school, what's your friggin' point? So's school choice, what's your friggin' point? You want the government to pay for your stuff. That's socialism, my friend. Get over it. And you know what? On that note, we don't demand that kids pay back, that adults pay back their freaking time of going to school as elementary and freaking high school kids. Well, we do. It's called taxes when you hold down a job and you pay in your taxes every year like everyone else does. So I'm going to stop you right there on that point alone. So, but it makes the college system everyone else's problem, and it's not just for those who went to school, and yada yada yada. Yeah, well, if you had federal funding, actual federal funded colleges that actually had the... I think that federally funded colleges would be the best example and the best foot forward for school choice that would ever be promoted. And here's why. It doesn't discriminate based off of political ideology. It would not discriminate off of religious ideology, which means that if you wanted to go to a school that was run by a religious institution and not a, and not a leftist political cause, basically, they all get the same money, right? I think that would probably be the first thing that should be said. And you would have way more people going to school. Now, that student loan is... A lot of people misuse that money for personal shit, and that's the other reason I am against student loans in the first place, right? Now, I'm also going to say that student loan shouldn't happen for the other reason as well. Here's the racket of your college. They buy a textbook. They pay the manufacturer of that textbook anywhere from $25 to $50. They charge the student. When I went to college for my trade, I went there for automotive repair and graduated. I didn't walk down wearing a cap and gown. I got mine by mail because of reasons that I'm not going to get into because they're deeply personal and extremely emotional, and this is not going to be an emotional topic. I was kind of heated under the collar yesterday because, I was scrolling through my Facebook, and the first 3 things on my Facebook feed all said, student loans are theft, and this is the exact order, student loans are theft, the Supreme Court was wrong, Biden has the right to forgive student loans, and then the third one was my point of wanting to delete student loans. My problem is that when I get on my Facebook, I get on there to see good recipes for food, people working on cars or good cars, funny jokes, cute, again with the cute cat videos, recipes, and the occasional funny anime or parrot joke. I don't want to get on there. Oh, and the stuff about guns too, because I'm a Second Amendment, very much advocate for the Second Amendment as well. If you don't have a gun, teach yourself, because there are things out there that the federal government cannot protect you from, nor your state or local government. You don't believe me? Then that's your problem. Literally, go out, get armed, get trained, get educated. learn when to shoot, learn how to shoot, learn when, and probably more importantly than both of those things is learning when not to shoot, right? We all of us gun owners know what I mean when I say this, but anyway, back on topic. So you're the student, you've gone out for the loan. Let's say you get approved. All right, well, that loan handler, which is, by the way, most of the time they're getting bailouts and grants from the federal government anyway, so and the stuff that they are getting is coming out of the same quote-unquote taxpayers that are arguing about how student loan forgiveness is theft. That's going to be a constant undercurrent from this point forward, because like anything that has the word department in front of it is going to be like federal, right? Even the IRS is actually a part of the Treasury, which is kind of messed up. But basically, the IRS and the Treasury are that bottleneck that all that money gets like dispersed out through a network to the other departments, right? And we all know that that's a mess. The president has oversight on what happens with that money. The president gets to kind of say, oh, well, yes, Congress said this much, but we got this much extra, so this much extra is what we're going to use for this other little side project in Department of Defense or whatever. Yep. You know, we all know how that fun end games can play out. The financial fun and games are just beginning at this point. And by fun and games, I mean shady stuff that is literally the misuse of taxpayer dollars from the top down at this point, right? Okay, so your money gets sent from your Treasury to the Department of Education, and we already talked about the amount that gets skimmed off from the budget that gets sent by Congress for whatever, trying to find out the breeding habits of ducks on cocaine project that the government decides that the Department of Defense apparently needs to know, or the Department of Agriculture apparently needs to find out, because I guess we're going to be feeding ducks cocaine at some point or something, right? Alright. Anyway, we go down from there, and you get down to the connection between your loan handler and the Department of Education. So now you get into the really messy stuff, right? So let's start with phase one. Phase one is the money that came from Congress and then got given to the Department of Education to give to the loan handler and the college. That money is kind of fluid in that when I did my student loan, it did not say Department of Education on it anywhere. It said Nelnet, which was the loan handler, which is the nice way of saying we're the federal government collection agency. We're setting up this contract for you to do a student loan, yada, yada, yada. You know, and it just kind of goes on from there, right? So, but from there, you also have your college and trade schools, right? And that's where it gets even messier, because on top of you having to pay your Pell Grant and your student loan, or maybe you're working outside of it and you're getting an income that way, right? And in some cases, all three are what needs to happen, right? Because some of the schools are just so outrageously expensive that you need to be working, taking a loan, and getting a Pell Grant. And for those who don't know what a Pell Grant is, when you go to school as a child, like we're talking K through 12, right? That is paid for by taxpayer dollars. That is the thing that people don't know. The other thing that people don't know about this fact is that there's usually, at the time you get done with your last year of high school, there's a surplus. It's not a large amount of surplus. That surplus is what is known as the Pell Grant. It goes into your college expenses. Your college expenses are supposed to be covered by some of the. I'm wording that wrong. Some of your college expenses are covered by this. It's supposed to be like your books, right? And maybe if you're in a class that uses like tools like, say, automotive or welding or HVAC, some of the tools and stuff that you'll use to learn that trade or skill. If you're a lawyer, what is that? A laptop, a notebook, a couple of law books, and a pen, and some paper, maybe a calculator, because math classes are like mandatory in college, like nationwide. That's like a nationwide requirement. Anyway, and by the way, this is all math too. This is all preordained and figured out by your federal government with or without your consent, and they don't care what you have to say about it until it comes voting season, which is kind of really more the point here. The only reason that the president is right now considering student loan forgiveness for any amount of people in this country is because he's trying to literally buy votes. Forgive the dog barking in the background. I have no control over what the fur baby does or does not do. I mean, I do to the degree that I can tell him to sit, roll over, and, whatever else. But I can't do anything about it. Sorry. And given that this is a live stream, I really don't, and speaking of, I really don't have the ability to edit the video. So, just bear that in mind. Anyway. Hey, dude, they don't want to see your backside. Although, it's probably more entertaining than, at this point, the entirety of the student loan process as it is. So, you're a student loan handler. What's your job? Your job is to disperse money to both the college and the student. So, how does that work? Okay. You get the money from the federal government and maybe your private coffers if you're a private loan handler, not a federal run one. For example, Sallie Mae and their connections to Nelnet. Well, your job at that point then becomes, okay, this student is going in for, let's use my example. This student is going in for automotive. Alright, he needs, let's say, what? I'm just going to spitball here at about $5,000 a semester. It's a 4-semester course. It's going to run him about roughly $18,000 to $20,000 because his last semester has fewer classes. So we're going to write him up a loan for $18,500 and let's say $52. That number is a rough approximate. I'm just spitballing and pulling a number out of my backside. That is not the actual number on my student loan, and as far as I'm aware, if it is a number that is on your student loan, it's a pure coincidence. There is no connection with any reality as far as this video is concerned, except for to use as an example. And I have to put that disclaimer out there so that way people don't assume that I'm throwing out someone's personal information. Right, because that becomes a Twitter fight that I don't need today. So, you get that money set aside for by that company under the assumption that you're going to be using all of it, but they don't give it all to you. You get the $5,000 or $4,000 per semester. That covers tuition, that covers your books, your tools, and whatever else you need for the course, right? Let's say room and board is not included and you had to pay for that. I was fortunate, I lived locally, nothing like that ever had to be covered. I just got a ride to school every day and or drove myself. Anyway, at the end of the day, that is where, number one, that is where a lot of misuse happens also. Is in your tuition and your book fees. As I mentioned before, with massive eye rolls, and any college student out there can attest to this, you pay $150 for a book that they pay anywhere from $10 to $50 for, which is a racket in and of itself. But you're expected to do that. Now, where I went to school, they gave us an allowance card for doing all of this stuff because all this stuff was handled through the in-house financial people. So when you went to the bookstore at the school to get your books, you just ran that debit card from the school that they assigned to you via your name, which weirdly enough was also your student ID. And let's say you wanted to go get a hot dog because you had like an extra dollar or something. Actually, it was more expensive than $1, which is another racket. It was like $5 for a basic hot dog with cheese and ketchup. I didn't even get fries with that, just as a heads up. That was when I discovered it was cheaper to go to Dollar Tree with my own money and go get, snacks for class that way. Back when a Dollar Tree was still just $1. I missed that, by the way, and screw you, Biden, for making it so it can't happen. And screw the pandemic for helping. Anyway, so at this point you're at your college, you trade, you go through year 4, you've gotten your loan. We've gone over the shady stuff about how the financial stuff rolls downhill so far. And your loan, by the way, this is where really the student loan payment process, refusing to pay student loans as theft, is kind of bullshit. Because at this point, you're already paying taxes, alright? That's assuming you're a student, you got a job, right? You're paying back into the system on top of your student loans via taxes. It's literally a second tax because you went to college, which in some cases is a trade school, not necessarily a liberal arts college. And if you're one of those poor suckers, I really feel bad for you. I mean, in my case, I kind of feel bad for myself because I found out that I could have just, got an apprenticeship and paid like $500 versus, the 20K roughly that I ended up having to come up with. But yeah, if you're looking at automotive, you can go get an apprenticeship or start small, start at like a Walmart Tire and Lube, get some experience, and then you can like get the books for automotive education yourself, which is way cheaper than actually going to school for it. You're still getting the hands-on experience, and you're still getting the book education, the book smarts to understand stuff like, for example, air-fuel ratios and braking ratios for your brake system, or, like 70-30, 50-50, 30-70, what the differences are between the three. The funny joke about the engine cycle sucks, spew, bang, blow. That was another funny thing that my automotive teacher did, and it was quite hilarious, and a lot of people thought that it was a sex, drugs, rock and roll joke until he explained it to them. I'm not going to explain it to you if you want to figure that out. Get into automotive, learn how to fix cars. You'll figure it out. Anyway, so you're already paying into the taxes. My question is this: why aren't they just having people pay it out of their taxes that they pay in for the federal government? They already know who you are. They already know that you're in the system as owing student loans. So why in the hell does it need to come out of a bill every month versus coming out of your taxes every year? Well, I'll tell you why, and this is where the shady shit begins. Interest rates. So on top of, and this goes back to the loan handler, this is not so much the college, this is the loan handler, this is your Sallie Mae, Nelnet, yada yada yada. So, when you apply for a student loan through your college, your financial aid advisor is going to look at you and say, probably something along these lines: this is your amount, this is the principal, this is the interest. That last little tidbit, the interest. And a lot of people out there don't know what interest is. When you say interest, they think, oh, you're interested in your student loans. No. Interest is the percentage of money beyond the principal that you owe for servicing a loan. That is to say, and if you're from the Middle East and you're of a certain religious ideology, interest is not acceptable, which is why a lot of Middle Eastern folks refuse to go to college in general, because interest is natively and inherently a part of that system. And oh, by the way, if you think that you're getting away with not having to pay interest, they'll just tack it into the principal, flat rate you, and you're still paying interest anyway. Whether you like it or not, you're still getting hit with it. It's just like the taxes thing. In Alaska, they don't have taxes on their price tags, because when you go to buy something via price tag in Alaska, the taxes are included. That's why everything's so much more expensive in Alaska. Anyway, back on point. Getting a little sidetracked there. That interest goes back to that loan handler simply for being a loan handler. And you might be sitting there thinking to yourself, well, Jared, why are they getting both grants, private financing from a financier if they're a private loan organization, and charging you interest? It's because it's called the triple dip. They are getting paid from you when you pay your loans. They get paid from that collection agency, basically the percentage that they charged you for interest, on top of whatever federal funding they get, on top of whatever private funding they get. So yes, as if the first two weren't bad enough, then they have to go back for thirds and bite you, the consumer, in the butt, right? Because let's face it, if you're a college student, you are consuming education, and it is by fact a product. Which is fine. I'm okay with education being a product. I don't like the fact that education is not considered a product actually as a child. In fact, I think that education should be... I think it should be as follows. K through 12 is mandatory, regardless. Right? You can drop out at any point past, like, you turn 16 years old. That is your... I would argue that is your
Just wait till you're done.
I would argue that is like almost a right at this point. And I just lost a viewer. And, at the end of the day, yes, not paying your student loans is, air quotes, theft. But who are you stealing from? Some people want to say the taxpayer. Okay, well, I gotta stop you right there, because taxation is effectively theft anyway. It's the government saying you must pay money for being here. So you are literally being taxed on holding a job in the United States, which I disagree with entirely. It's just that it's the only way that they can really do it accurately, I guess, according to what they will say. There are other ways to tax people. I'm not going to cover that because the history of taxes would take what has already turned into a 51-minute video so far and turn it into probably a half a friggin' day of unethical tax practices. And if you wanted to cover the United States tax code, I would need a camera that can handle about probably 2 weeks worth of recording straight and a trip to the Library of Congress. Anyway, back to the point. You're a student, you graduated college, now you got to start paying them loans back. Well, your bill kind of looks as such. You owe this amount this month. In my case, it's like $50. Here's the space that you can enter into down here to make a slip for your bank account, blah, 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 blah. We got all of that jazz, right? We all know what a bill looks like. I shouldn't have to... If I have to explain what a bill looks like at this point, go get educated. Go out and touch grass, my dude. So you pay it, and that money goes back to the Department of Education. It does not go back to the IRS. Which is the fun thing that has a lot of people, myself included, like, why is it not going back into the taxpayer money, right, that it should be going back into? It doesn't. In fact, actually, it doesn't even touch the IRS or the Treasury or the Department of Education. Really. It goes into that loan handler, third down on the list, and from there, they get to take their percentage out as a collection agency. That's your Nelnet, which is run by the federal government and never goes back into the Treasury. It just goes back into the Department of Education system. All over again. to be put into another grant system for further college use. So here's where the issue then becomes. Am I really taking taxpayer money, or did they steal your taxpayer money and throw it into a money laundering racket and giving people an education as kind of a cover for basically stealing taxpayer dollars to recycle into these private organizations? The answer is both. The answer is actually both things are happening, right? And my lack of choice to pay the $5,000 has nothing to do with actually this system. Actually has more to do with the fact that I get a bill every month that says I owe $0 still, despite the fact that that was supposed to stop happening last year. So I haven't asked too many questions about it because, I'm a good little capitalist who, if no one wants me to pay an amount in because they keep telling me I don't owe anything for it, I'm not going to pay it in. It's just kind of common sense. And oh, by the way, I'm not getting interest if I'm getting interest, it's pennies on the dollar because my loan is so low. And it looks like I got disconnected. Or did I? Oh no, it's just Facebook updating. Or not Facebook, but YouTube. Alright, anyway. So you get down to the point that you are starting to pay your loans for probably the first time in a long time. Let's say you take a year to not pay them off. Well, your interest rate's going to go through the roof. Hard to do in business, right? At this point in the United States. Every penny of that interest that you pay, none of it goes back into the Treasury, none of it goes back into the IRS. So you could sit here and argue about it's taxpayer money, you have to pay it back. Except you're not paying it back to the taxpayers or even the tax system. The money doesn't even make it that far. It only gets about as far as the loan handler. Just as a heads up. Thank you, baby.
You're welcome.
Just figured I'd let you know that, your ability to call it taxpayer dollars went out the window when it got down to the student loan handler in the first place. Anything after this point right here, you as a taxpayer, right between the Department of Education and the loan handler tidbits, the minute that money crossed from the Department of Education into the loan handler, you have quite literally zero say on that topic. Right about there. That's about where your influence as a voter stops. And that is the other reason I think that the student loan system needs to be completely abolished. Because they want to sit here and say, oh, but it's so good that you're paying your loans back. All that taxpayer money that needs to go back. Well, guess what? It doesn't go back to the IRS. It does not go back to the Department of the Treasury. It usually ends up going to your loan handler and exiting the system as such. Unless you are going through a taxpayer-funded, i.e. Nelnet, collection agency. It literally just, stop at that point. Don't tell me student loan forgiveness is theft, because at this point in time, the theft happened when you paid your taxes and they decided to give people student loans in the first place. That's where the theft took place. My refusal to pay it back is just saying, hey, you gave me this thing, thanks. At that point, I'm just a person receiving stolen goods. And that is literally the moral of the story, is the theft happened when you paid your taxes and they decided to use it for student loans. Don't blame the student, blame your government. Plain and simple. And that is my take on the whole situation, and that is my understanding of everything that goes on. And oh, by the way, if anyone wants to get in these comments and argue that the money does go back to Congress or it does go back to the Treasury, here's a fun little fact for you. Good luck paying anything into the Department of Treasury or Congress that does not go through the IRS. Good luck with that. It's called a donation, and there is a cap on donations. They're called political contributions. Literally, as soon as that money literally gets, and I'm gonna I'll pull up the 3D paint that I'm using, so that way I can put a line there so people can understand where the line in the sand actually is. We'll use a brush. I'm not gonna get too technical with it, and we'll just use, you know what, we'll use a nice spicy red color here. About the time your money crosses this line right here, as a taxpayer, that's where the line is. That is where your influence stops. That is where your ability to scream up and down that you are, and it's not showing up. Oh, that's because I'm not doing that. Gee, imagine that. Let's refresh that image. That way people can menu, save. There you go. There's the line. Right there. Right there. So everything above that line is taxpayer money, right? You can declare that that's taxpayer money. As soon as it gets into the loan handler, it then enters the money laundry, where the loan handler gives it both to the college and the student. And after that happens, it's no longer your taxpayer money, it's the loan handler's money, honey. Whether you want to accept it or not is irrelevant. That is the way the system works. Which is the other reason that I think that the student loan system needs to be abolished, and we need to be directly government funding colleges on a non-biased, untouchable basis that cannot be touched at all. And you can call it socialism all that you want, but it's better than this crap. Because then you're holding the individual completely accountable for money that, by the way, your colleges are already getting grants from the Department of Education just to stay open and pay their staff. Most colleges do that because most of them, their income from massively overcharging for books doesn't even come close to covering a professor's salary. That's another fun bit to this video too, is like, and I'm not going to get too far into the weeds as far as the finances of the college itself goes, but I will tell you that the stuff that they do pales in comparison. Absolutely. And actually, I'm going to say another thing too. I went to school at Arkansas Technical University. Our part of my education in automotive repair is that we worked on people's vehicles for the staff and stuff. I think it would have been better if we, in order to pay for the school itself, if we actually charged the billing like a proper service writer would have, and all the money that we would have gotten paid into us as normal employees should have gone back to the school, kind of like you would for a bake sale. Absolutely think that should have happened, because then the school probably would have been way better than what we had. I mean, it was great for what we had, though. I'll say that much. My teachers were amazing. But no, once you get back to the student loan thing, though, once you get below that red line of going from the Department of Education and the Treasury into where your loan handlers and your colleges are, that's not taxpayer money anymore. And it hasn't been that way for a long time. You just failed to see that it was turning into that. And had you seen it coming, I should hope that you would have had common sense to stop it dead in its tracks by voting for people that would have said, we're going to not only abolish student debt, but we're going to remove the student loan program altogether. I should hope that that would have been your reaction, but The problem with that is that the government doesn't want you knowing this stuff, so they tuck it into, 500-page bills here and there. We're going to pay for your insurance, but you'll get to keep your doctor kind of shit. And yes, that is a slap in Obama's face. And I'll do that 30 times in a fucking video if I want to. Because he was a public figure when he made that decision, and he deserves every ounce of criticism for it. And then there's the whole Nancy Pelosi argument of you need to pass the bill in order to know what's in it. That's basically what these student loans are. You have to take the loan in order to know where your money's going. Or you have to know someone who took the loan in order to know where your money's going, right? But no, you're not getting taxpayer dollars put back into the system, and that's why our deficit is so bad. That's why these loan handlers are like probably the scummiest part of the whole system. It's why the federal government needs to start considering passing a bill to either one, do away with colleges, or two, and integrate it as part of the public school system, or two, fund the colleges that are there directly and not the students. Now, where does that come into play? Well, you can either... Oh, and I think tuition needs to be fucking abolished too, but that's a totally different matter, because I look at it like this: if you're being funded by the government, your teachers and your professors should be funded as well. That's part of that. Now, housing and stuff like that, I think that's a student problem. I'm going to say that, like, room and board should not be incorporated as part of tuition. Tuition should literally just be to cover, like, your teacher's salary. Room and board needs to be a personal problem. Like, because you go to college, it's to learn a skill to go work in an industry, right? Well, even when you're working in that industry, you're still going to be paying a rent. Or a mortgage. At this point, in certain states, it's cheaper to do a mortgage than it is rent, usually, as long as you can come up with a down payment. By a matter of like $400 or $500, in some cases $1,000 cheaper a month, depending again on where you live. Anyway, yeah, there's a buzzing noise coming from my computer. I'm wondering if it's something audio related, or if it's my fans are dying in this computer. I don't know.
Had a mini breakout.
I hope it's not the fans. But yes, no, student loans are a racket. I don't care whether they forgive the loans or not. It doesn't matter, because as soon as it crosses this red line, it's no longer taxpayer dollars. You stop being taxpayer dollars right where this red line is. The second it hit that loan handler's greedy fucking hands for whatever financial institution it is, it got thrown into a coffer with a bunch of other friggin' money that's not separated from, student loans or anything else. It just gets said, oh, well, because we're a part of this program as loan handler for the Department of Education, now we have to make sure that certain students get certain loans. Big deal. To these loan handling financial organizations, they don't care one way or the other. They just see it as money flowing in from the government. They disperse it to colleges. Not so much the colleges, although they do your tuition that way a lot of the times. Like, a lot of places, the student doesn't even see the tuition amount. It just goes straight to the college from the loan handler, on top of the grant that comes out of your taxpayer dollars, courtesy of Congress. Which, by the way, in between the IRS and the Department of Treasury, there is a congressional, oversight bubble that I left out of there, because once you add that bubble, then you have to have the conversation about how much your vote counts and yada yada yada, which I purposefully wanted to leave out. But now that we're on the topic, as soon as you cross that red line, the only way to do anything about that red line is to vote people in who will do something about it. The second that money hits the student is the second that it becomes a relationship between the student and the loan handler. At that point, there is no taxpayer dollar relationship. It's literally just money that they own, that they owe the loan handler. It's not even the federal government at that point. The only thing about student loans that makes them different from other loans is that there is no time limit on paying it off. That is it. That is all. 100%. That's it. So you're still, and even then, I could sit here and calculate how long I want to pay my student loans for. And let's say I want to pay $5 a month for the rest of my friggin' life. Well, guess what? You're only getting $5 back, and I might not even pay it off by the time I drop dead. So I guess you're still not getting your taxpayer dollars. Gee, imagine that. Your taxpayer dollars, quote unquote, that are no longer taxpayer dollars, are still gone. Much the same way that they are in this system regularly, because you're just paying back a loan handler at this point, because none of that money, yet again, goes back to the IRS. Now, let's go to a different model. Now that we've spent an hour on the current model, I'm only going to spend about 10 minutes on this model. How would this be different than if we included it into everyone's taxes? Well, you would eliminate this system altogether. The colleges would be basically funded by the government directly, so this wouldn't even be remotely an issue. Your books would be rentals, and if you damage the book, you'd have to pay back the cost for the book, just like you do for a library. And what's that? If you don't want to use the tools that are in the tool room or at the school for your education, well, I guess you better come up with and go get a job and come up with that extra money on the side. Alright? I'm pretty sure that we've established that there are other ways to do this, and there are better ways to do this. And everyone out there just pays, like, what, $5 more on their fucking taxes, which, heaven forbid, you should have to pay what is an extra gallon of milk now. I can't believe that a gallon of milk is $5. Then you're literally, like, you can, as a citizen, just show your social security card. Walk into a school and say, I want to learn this skill. You don't have to wait 2 weeks to get into college. You just have to wait for the next semester to start. You don't have to fight with student aid organizations in through the first, like, half of your first semester, so you can focus on your studies and doing a job outside of school. Let's say you want to do both. You can eliminate this entirely by doing that. Because the money then does not need a loan handler. It does not need to go through the department. Well, I mean, it can still go through the Department of Education. They'd just be handing the fucking, basically the check to the college at that point, right? And all it does is play into your Pell Grant the same way that we're already doing it. It's tried and true. We know what we're doing at this point. I don't understand why this has to be like this. In fact, we all know that it doesn't need to be like this. It's like this so people can get that extra dollar. Right? It's like this so that extra $5 in taxes doesn't come out of your taxes every year. But then you get to whine and complain about student loans and people not paying their student loans, even though, you know, you're not a student yourself. Or maybe you're the unlucky sod who is, and you're paying both IRS tax rates and your student loans. Fun fact. So literally, yes, student loans are just another layer of taxes for taxing you for going to college. At that point, why don't we just flat rate it for everyone? Tell everyone that they're going to have to pay an extra $5 in. There's, what, 330 million of us in this country, times that by 5. You've got $1 billion right there. What's that? That doesn't cover it? Okay. Well, let's say even you add a 0 on to the end of it, right? And by the way, in doing this and making it literally taxpayer subsidized, so that way the only colleges that are getting paid are from the taxpayer dollars, means that we can annihilate the $1.3 trillion in debt that students are going through nationwide, making it so they can pay in more taxes, and that $50 extra in taxes or $5 extra in taxes just doesn't fucking matter because you're making more money anyway. Food for thought. You can have a capitalist system with socialist additions into it. You cannot have a socialist system that's still socialist with capitalism in it. It doesn't work that way. Capitalism, it has to be front and center all the time. Socialism just doesn't work compared to capitalism done right. This is not done right. This is done the way that politicians do it to try to grease and line as many pockets and hands as they can, of their friends and buddies in the financial sector, so they get kickbacks, by the way. Oh yeah. That's the other fun thing. Once you get above the college trade line and where the student is, once you get up over there, there's this disgusting, filthy little relationship with all the organizations that are not your money, but it has to do with your money, right? So let's say a loan handler wants to bump up student loans, but it's to such a degree that it needs an act of Congress. Well, then all of a sudden someone's palm is getting greased and someone's back pocket's getting lined in Congress to put forth a bill or slip into another bill somewhere else to increase those loan rates or increase the cap on those loan rates so that loan handler can bump up that interest as much as they friggin' want to, basically. That's just a little food for your thought as well. And also with the Department of Education, you also get the United States' largest union, which is the Board of Education, which is pushing liberal ideology into not just colleges. It's probably the most prevalence is in college, but also into our high schools, elementary schools, and for those who have a middle school, your middle schools too. So just as a heads up, that's being paid for by your tax dollars too. Yeah. So don't come to me with your crocodile tears, as effectively, about taxpayer dollars and student loans, because it's a bunch of bull. It is a bunch of bull. They either forgive them or they don't. You have literally no say over it. It is not in your hands to do anything about it, except for one thing, and it's probably the most important thing you can do as a United States citizen, and that is get out and friggin' vote and stop plaguing my Facebook feed, you jackasses. Thank you. Have a lovely day. We are hopefully going to have a lovely day. I got an oil change to go do.